I want to welcome you to this Friday edition of Thrive in the Word. We're continuing our study of Revelation, or the seven churches of Revelation, and today we're in the second chapter of Revelation, and we're going to start with verse number 26 of this wonderful teaching on the church at Thyatira. Now, in our last video, we talked about two different people, those who overcome and those who keep doing the deeds that Jesus said, my deeds. In other words, they're doing his work in obedience to him. But now this is the promise. And this promise is very, very lavish. It's tremendous. But we do need to set the time frame. You know, many times we as believers, we believe the promise of God and we believe it to happen now. Well, this is not a promise that's going to happen now. I don't believe. This is a promise that's going to happen. And notice what Jesus said. He said, until the end. In other words, if you will keep doing this until the end. Now, what is the end? I believe that Jesus here is giving reference to the end times. I believe that Jesus is giving reference to a very specific place in the end times, which we will call the millennial reign of Christ. What does he say? Well, he says, to him I give authority over the nations, and he shall rule them with the rod of iron, as the vessels of the potter are broken to pieces, as I also have received authority from my Father, and I will give him the morning star. Now, what is he talking about? First of all, in verse number 26, the end of verse number 26 is a direct quote from the Septuagint. What is the Septuagint? The Septuagint is the Greek writing of the Old Testament. It's the Greek writing of the Old Testament. And what's Jesus referring to? He's referring to Psalms, the second chapter, verse number 8. And let me just go ahead and turn there. Psalms, the second chapter, verse number 8, one of my favorite Psalms and one of my favorite verses. It says, ask of me, and I will give you the nations as your inheritance, and the very ends of the earth as your possession. Now you say, well, it sounds a little bit different. It sounds different because one is the Greek translation of the Hebrew. And how many of you know when you translate something, it comes out differently? But he's saying, ask of me and I will give you the nations. Here, it's written like this, to him I will give authority over the nations. What's he talking about? He's talking about Jesus' reign. You see, at the very beginning of our study, we said the theme of the book of Revelations is Jesus. It's a revelation of the Lord Jesus Christ. But it's not a revelation of the Lord Jesus Christ at his death and his burial. It's not a revelation of the Lord Jesus Christ at his birth. It's a revelation of the Lord Jesus Christ at the end of all time. You know, at the end of everything, Jesus is going to have authority over the nations. All the nations will bow. And you know what? We will, as believers, we who overcome, we who do the deeds that God has given us to do, we are going to rule and reign with him over the nations. Just think about that. You see, your life doesn't end when you take your last breath. Your life's going to continue. And if you've been faithful, if you've done what Jesus has asked you to do, if you've overcome all the influences in your life. You're going to stand and you're going to rule with Jesus over the nations of the world. Now let's go to verse number 27. And he shall rule them with a rod of iron, as vessels of the potter are broken to pieces, as I also have received authority from my Father. He will rule them with a rod of iron. This is a quote from Psalms 2, verse 9. And again, it's in the Septuagint. And it's also a prophecy about Jesus. And Jesus is going to stand and he's going to rule over all the nations. And he's going to rule them with a rod of iron. A rod of iron. And then Jesus switches and he goes and he quotes from Isaiah, the 30th chapter, verse number 14. And he says here, he says, that are broken, as vessels broken to pieces. As vessels broken to pieces. This brings hope and assurance to the overcomer and the obedient that they will reign. Jesus is going to come and he's going to begin to break the vessels that have ruled over this world. He's going to come and he's going to use his authority. And you know what? This world is going to experience 1,000 years of the rule and reign of Jesus Christ. What a wonderful and beautiful place that's going to be. Oh my, what a beautiful, beautiful promise. Now you might be thinking, well, I want this promise now. Oh, don't think that way. This is a promise for you and I that if we will overcome and if we will do what Jesus says, we're going to spend 1,000 years ruling and reigning with Jesus. Can you imagine the beauty of that? And then he says at the end, for I have received authority from my Father. Jesus says, this authority comes from my Father. Verse number 28, and I will give him the morning star. Now, the morning star in the Old Testament is a reference to Satan. In the New Testament, the morning star is a reference to Jesus. I will give them the morning star. We will have Jesus. We will be in such close relationship with Jesus as we rule and reign. The last thing that he says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. You have an ear to hear? Then are you listening to what God is saying to the churches? I hope you are. God bless you until we speak to you again.